The 2:17 a.m. notification was not a sound. It was a vibration, a mosquito wing buzz against the Italian marble of the nightstand. It was the only thing that moved in the suffocating, climate-controlled silence of the penthouse. Carolyn Pierce, 6 months pregnant and wide awake, stared at the second iPhone. The one her husband, Michael, claimed was just for international markets. The screen was black, but the preview text glowed with a venomous intimacy. Sienna, the Carlisle, 9 p.m. Don't be late. In that instant, the silence of their life, bought with $50 million of Central Park West real estate, became a tomb. The silence in the penthouse was the most expensive thing Michael Pierce owned. It was a deep, velvety void, purchased with triple-paned acoustic glass, 6,000 square feet of air high above Manhattan, and a staff that moved like shadows. For Carolyn, now Carolyn Pierce, for the past 3 years, that silence had once felt like peace. Now, it felt like pressure, pushing the air from her lungs. She stood in the center of their cavernous walk-in closet, a space larger than her first apartment in D.C. Racks of Michael's custom-tailored suits, Xenia, Brioni, Tom Ford, stood like a regimented army on one side. Her own wardrobe, a vibrant collection of couture he had hand-picked for her, faced his in a riot of color and silk. He used to call her his exotic bird, and this was her gilded cage, lined with Dior and Chanel. Carolyn ran a hand over her belly, where the slight, firm curve of her 6-month pregnancy was now undeniable. This child, their son, was supposed to be the final, perfect piece of their perfect life, the heir to the Pierce private equity dynasty. But the joy she'd felt during the first trimester had hardened into a cold, heavy knot in her stomach. The betrayal hadn't come as a sudden, shattering event. It was a slow poison seeping into the foundations of their marriage. It started with the little things, the late nights at the office that stretched into mornings, the urgent business trips to Hong Kong and Berlin that left him smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. A faint, cloying scent of Frederick Moll's Portrait of a Lady. Too sophisticated, too deliberate to be an accident. It was the way he angled his phone away from her. A screen that had once been open to her now turned into a dark, guarded secret. Michael was a creature of habit and towering arrogance. That combination, Carolyn was beginning to realize, would be his undoing. He believed he was too clever to get caught, and that she was too docile, too in love, to ever suspect him. He was wrong on both counts. The first real crack in the facade had appeared a month ago. He had left his secondary phone, the one he claimed was for international business, charging on his nightstand. An almost laughably amateur mistake. At 2:17 a.m., as Carolyn lay awake, wrestling with pregnancy-induced insomnia, it lit up. Not with a call or a text, but a calendar notification. Sienna, the Carlisle, 9 p.m. Don't be late. Sienna. The name was elegant, exotic. It sounded expensive, just like everything else in Michael's life. Carolyn's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence. Her first instinct was to grab the phone, wake him, and scream, to shatter the placid surface of their lives with the jagged edges of her pain. But a deeper, colder instinct took over. An instinct she thought she'd buried long ago from a life before Michael. Before she was Carolyn Pierce, society wife and philanthropist in training. She was once Carolyn Reed, one of the sharpest opposition researchers in Washington, D.C. Her job hadn't been accounting. It had been deconstruction. She dismantled political careers. She followed the real money, the dark money, to uncover the rot buried beneath layers of complex pacts and corporate lies. She didn't just hunt financial predators. She hunted the politicians they owned, She'd been the one to find the offshore account that ended a senator's career, the one who traced a charitable donation back to a Russian oligarch, effectively killing a cabinet nomination. She'd given it all up for Michael. She'd been burned out, cynical, and tired of the fight. He had seemed so solid, so charming, so real. He promised her a life of peace, a life where she wouldn't have to fight anymore. She had believed she'd found a love that made her old life of suspicion and spreadsheets feel grey and irrelevant. Now, staring at that glowing screen, she realized she hadn't given it up. She had only been dormant. That night, she didn't sleep. She slipped out of bed, her movements as silent as the staff she so rarely saw. She went to her home office, a sterile white space she rarely used. She turned on her encrypted laptop, a relic from her old life that Michael found adorably paranoid, and began to dig. She didn't start with his phone. She started with his money. Money never lied. Michael's finances were a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore holding companies, and blind trusts designed to minimize taxes and maximize secrecy. To anyone else, it would be impenetrable. To Carolyn, it was a language she spoke fluently. Her mistake had been love. She had willingly blinded herself. She'd accepted his explanation that this complexity was just smart business. Her greatest weapon was his ultimate arrogance. When they married, he had given her access to the master accounts of the family office. It was a grand romantic gesture, a symbol of their partnership. He never imagined she possessed the skill to actually comprehend the system, let alone navigate it. He thought her Oppo research job was about gossiping and reading voting records. He had no idea she could read a wire transfer confirmation like a page of poetry. For weeks, she spent her nights mapping his empire while he slept, or while he was out at one of his business dinners. She was a ghost in the machine, tracing wire transfers, analyzing credit card statements, and cross-referencing expense reports. And there she was, Sienna Laru. The name appeared again and again. A penthouse apartment at Hudson Yards, paid for by a Delaware LLC, MJP Holdings III, linked directly to Michael. A black Amex Centurion card, a supplementary on an account Carolyn had never seen, racking up charges at Bergdorf's, Cartier, and five-star hotels around the globe. Flights that mirrored Michael's own travel schedule, but always in first class, one row behind him. He wasn't just having an affair. He was funding a parallel life. The pain was immense, a physical blow that left her breathless. She would sit in her cold office at 4 a.m., one hand on her swelling belly, the other scrolling through hotel folios from the peninsula in Hong Kong. The baby would kick, as if sensing her distress, and the tears would finally come. Silent, hot tears of humiliation. But the strategist in her was detached. Pain was data. It fueled her. The sheer scale of the deception was staggering. It wasn't just about the money. It was the meticulous planning, the years of lies woven into every "I love you," every gentle touch on her stomach, each whispered promise. Each smile he gave her across candle-lit dinners was now revealed as part of a grand illusion, one she had lived in without question. Her stomach turned with the weight of those memories, now curdled and tainted. She dug deeper, past the girlfriend, into the real fortress, his business. She found the leverage points, the hidden debts, the secret partners. She found the contingency folder, buried on a server he thought was air-gapped. It was his blackmail folder. Dirt on his competitors, on corrupt politicians, even on board members of his own firm. This was how he won. Not by being smarter, but by being dirtier. She now understood the man she had married. He wasn't a king. He was a parasite, and she was just his latest host. But the true catalyst, the event that turned her from a woman betrayed into something far more dangerous, came last Tuesday. Michael was on a conference call in his home office. He called it his skiff, a soundproof room he'd had built for sensitive negotiations. The heavy oak doors were shut. He believed they were impenetrable. They weren't. Not if you were standing right outside, and not if the door was, by some miracle of fate, left a fraction of an inch ajar. Carolyn was walking past on her way to the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. She was about to pass the door when she heard his voice, low, sharp, and stripped of its usual charm. He wasn't talking about acquisitions or investor calls. He was talking about her. The prenup is ironclad, Kenji. She gets $1 million. That's it. She recognized the name. Kenji Tanaka, Michael's notoriously cutthroat attorney, a man with the soul of a shark. Carolyn froze, her hand flattening against the hallway wall. Her blood turned to ice. But the pregnancy complicates things, Michael continued, his tone like flint. The optics are awful. We can't have a messy public divorce, not with the new fund launching. A pause. Then the words that stopped her heart. So we control the narrative. We build a case, unstable, hormonal, emotionally erratic. We'll get a psych eval ordered. We'll prove she's an unfit mother. Unfit mother. The phrase struck her like a slap across the face. He was going to take her son. Kenji's voice came through the speaker, calm and deadly. The prenup gives her a one-time payout. She'll fight it, of course. But once we have the leverage of the child, she'll fold. She'll take the deal and disappear. Supervised visits, twice a year. If she behaves, her knees buckled. She reached for the wall to steady herself, her breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts. The walls that once protected her now felt like they were closing in, silent witnesses to a betrayal so deep it hollowed her out. Every cell in her body screamed to storm in, to confront him, to claw his eyes out. But something stronger held her back. Not fear. Not grief. Clarity. Carolyn had to clamp her hand over her mouth to stop the sob from escaping. But it wasn't a sob of sorrow. It was a sob of pure, incandescent rage. He wasn't just planning to leave her. He was planning to erase her, to paint her as delusional, to take the only thing that still mattered in the world. He was going to use their child as a weapon to destroy her. In that moment, standing in the cold, silent hallway of her gilded cage, the heartbroken wife died. The strategist was reborn, armed with a mother's fury. He wanted to leave her with nothing. She would leave him with less. She backed away from the door, as silent as she had approached. Her mind, moments ago, a maelstrom of pain, was now a chessboard. This was no longer about heartbreak. This was war. And she, Carolyn Reed, had never lost a war. She went to her office and locked the door. She opened her financial maps. She had seen the load-bearing walls, the pressure points, the keystones holding up the grand arch of his fortune, and she began to draft a plan. Not for divorce, for demolition. She needed an ally, someone she could trust implicitly, someone whose skills complemented her own, someone who hated Michael Pierce almost as much as she now did. She picked up her burner phone, a plain, untraceable device she had bought with cash weeks earlier, and typed a single message to the only number saved in it. Her brother, David Reed. David was the black sheep of the family, a cybersecurity genius, a true savant, living in a cluttered loft in Austin, working as a white hat hacker for a boutique digital security firm. He saw the world in code, lines of breach and protection. He had always despised Michael, calling him a charismatic sociopath from the first time they met at Thanksgiving. Carolyn had once dismissed it as brotherly jealousy. Now she saw it as the clearest truth she'd ever missed. Their relationship was complicated. She had bailed him out of serious trouble years ago, a youthful indiscretion involving the Department of Defense. He owed her, and they both knew it. Her message was simple: Operation Bonaparte. Are you in? It was a code from their childhood, a nod to Napoleon's escape from Elba, their shorthand for a plan that was bold, risky, and required flawless execution. The reply came in under 30 seconds. For you, Caro, I'd burn down the internet, send the coordinates. The plan had a name. Now it needed a timeline. Carolyn pulled up Michael's calendar. In 2 weeks, he was scheduled to fly to their villa in St. Bart's for a solo wellness retreat, supposedly to decompress before the next fiscal quarter. But the flight records she'd already retrieved showed a second ticket. Sienna Laru. They would be together, an ocean away, tangled in sheets Carolyn had paid for. They would be sleeping, and she would be working. For the next 14 days, Carolyn played the part of the devoted, glowing, expectant mother. She feigned cravings for pickles and ice cream, discussed nursery color palettes. She settled on a soothing, pale blue, and smiled warmly whenever Michael touched her stomach. Every smile was a lie. Every touch felt like a spider crawling across her skin. She was a ghost in her own life, observing, collecting, preparing. With methodical precision, she gathered the last vital pieces of the puzzle: the security protocols for the private banking portals in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, the specific vocal authentication phrases used with his broker at Pictet Group, the seed phrases for multiple cryptocurrency cold storage wallets, which she discovered on a thumb drive hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of The Prince by Machiavelli on his bookshelf. The irony was so sharp it nearly tasted sweet. David worked his end. He set up a chain of virtual private networks, VPNs, that would mask her digital activity through a dozen countries in seconds, making her electronic presence untraceable. He also prepared her clean slate package, a new identity: Anna Miller, a Portuguese passport, a driver's license, and a network of new bank accounts in a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. He was her digital ghost maker. The night before Michael's departure, he was in a particularly generous mood. He presented her with a gift, a velvet box. Inside, a ludicrously large diamond necklace. "For the most beautiful mother-to-be in the world," he said, his voice smooth as silk. Carolyn felt a wave of nausea, and it had nothing to do with pregnancy. She let him clasp it around her neck, the gems cool and heavy against her skin. "It's beautiful, Michael. Thank you." "I'll miss you," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "I'll be waiting," she replied, holding his gaze in the mirror. The woman in the reflection was a stranger, a serene smile and eyes as cold as the diamonds on her throat. He would soon be lying next to his mistress. She would be waiting, not for his call, but for the moment she would burn everything he'd built to the ground. The flight to St. Bart's departed from Teterboro at 10:05 p.m. Carolyn watched the private jet's icon move slowly across the flight tracker app on her burner phone until it became a speck over the Atlantic. Michael would be settling in, sipping a vintage champagne. Sienna would be with him. The performance had begun. Carolyn's own performance ended the moment the heavy penthouse door clicked shut behind him. The sweet, docile mask slipped off. She moved through the silent, opulent house, her footsteps echoing in the vastness. She walked to the closet and removed the diamond necklace. She didn't return it to its velvet box. She let it fall onto the thick carpet, where it lay like a glittering serpent. It was never a gift. It was a shackle. She would wear it no longer. Her command center was now her stark white home office, transformed. A second monitor, brought in by David's courier 2 days earlier, sat beside her encrypted laptop. A quiet, cooling fan buzzed softly on the desk. Nearby sat a flask of lukewarm chamomile tea, 3 protein bars, and a high-capacity power bank. This was her war room. The space was cold, sterile, but it buzzed with an electricity she hadn't felt in years. This was the hunt. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind cycling through each step with surgical clarity. Beneath that, however, her pulse beat erratically, a quiet thrum of adrenaline and maternal terror. There would be no second chances. The battle would last approximately 8 hours, the window between Michael falling asleep mid-flight and his private bank in Geneva opening for business. She put on her headset and initiated a secure, end-to-end encrypted call to David. "Stage 1. Are you green?" Carolyn's voice was flat, composed. "Green across the board," David replied, his voice crackling slightly, but just as steady. "I'm inside the Pierce Capital network infrastructure right now. It's a fortress, Caro." But he left the key under the mat. "The smart home integration," she said, not asked. "Exactly," David confirmed. He linked everything, security cams, climate controls, even the on-site server, to a single IoT hub for convenience. Its security is tight, but the firmware has a tiny crack. I'm in. I've got full access to the internal network. I can monitor every data packet moving in and out. If a silent alarm trips, I'll kill it before it even thinks of dialing out. "You're invisible." Carolyn took a slow, deep breath. "Okay, David, I'm going in." Her strategy was a cascade, precision-engineered for speed and devastation. She wouldn't just empty one account. She would initiate a synchronized, multi-front financial collapse. She leaned forward, fingers tightening on the keyboard. Every keystroke would be a wound, every confirmation a small detonation. She was not just dismantling his empire. She was reclaiming her own voice, one transaction at a time. Her list was sorted by liquidity and risk. First targets, brokerage accounts, Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. This was the core of his liquid net worth, hundreds of millions in equities, bonds and mutual funds. Accessing them required more than just a password. It demanded a 2-factor authentication, 2FA code, sent to Michael's primary phone. His phone was currently 35,000 feet in the air, set to airplane mode. Useless to him, but not to her. "David," she said, "I'm initiating the login for the Morgan Stanley portal. I need you to intercept the 2FA. Ready when you are. Go." Carolyn typed in the username and complex password. Pierce King 707. She'd figured it out weeks ago. His arrogance was her greatest ally. The portal prompted for a 6-digit code. It sent. "Go." "Got it," David said. A tense 4-second pause. The SMS was rerouted to a virtual number, then to me. "I'm seeing the packet. Code is 7711092. Carolyn's fingers flew. 771092. Access granted. She was in. A dizzying array of numbers, stock symbols and transaction logs filled the screen. A portfolio worth over $310 million, her heart pounded. But her hands were steady. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times. She didn't liquidate everything at once. That would trigger alerts, circuit breakers, system flags. Instead, she initiated a series of strategic block trades. Large positions in highly liquid blue-chip stocks were sold off in carefully spaced transactions and immediately converted to cash. Now came the critical step, moving it. She couldn't wire the funds directly to her new accounts. This was where Michael's own maze of shell corporations came into play. Over the past 3 years, he had occasionally used her maiden name, Carolyn Reed, to set up small LLCs for investment structuring, empty shells, forgotten entities. Until now, Carolyn had quietly and legally taken full control of 3 of them. From the Morgan Stanley core account, She initiated a chain of wire transfers, each just below $1 million, to avoid heightened oversight. The recipient, Reed Strategic Holdings, LLC. The payment notes, consulting services rendered. From there, the money would jump from Reed Strategic to a second shell, then a third, before finally landing in its end destination, a brand new corporate account at a private bank in Liechtenstein, under the name Helvetia Strategic Solutions, an entity wholly controlled by one Anna Miller. It was a painstaking process. Log in, authenticate, execute, wire, again and again, for 2 straight hours. She repeated the exact process with the Goldman Sachs account. The numbers in the Liechtenstein account climbed at a staggering pace. Second target, the offshore strongholds, Pictet Group in Geneva, and a smaller bank in the Cayman Islands. This was the old money, the buried money. It was also the hardest to breach. The security at this level was biometric. To access the Pictet account, Michael used voice authentication. "You need to give me your best, Michael," David said, his voice carrying a trace of gallows humor. Carolyn was ready. She had spent weeks compiling hours of Michael's voice recordings, from podcast interviews, keynote presentations, and, most valuably, a file she had captured herself of him dictating investment notes. With open-source AI software, she had stitched together a parsable synthetic voice print. It was still a gamble. She dialed the Pictet private banking hotline. A crisp Swiss-German voice answered. "I need to authorize a transfer," Carolyn replied, her voice masked by advanced voice-altering software David had provided. "Of course, sir. Please state your name and account number." She gave the details. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. And now for vocal authentication. Please state the phrase, 'The mountain air is the clearest.'" This was it. Carolyn clicked a button. The digitally recreated voice of Michael Pierce delivered the phrase, "The mountain air is the clearest." A long, agonizing silence followed. "Verification successful," the banker said. "How may we direct your funds, Mr. Pierce?" A wave of relief swept through her. She quickly dictated the transfer instructions, moving the entire balance, a staggering $200 million to the same Liechtenstein account. Third target, the untraceable cryptocurrency. Michael had boasted that it was his apocalypse insurance. He stored the private keys in cold storage on a Ledger Nano X, the same thumb drive she'd found inside the prints. David walked her through it. Bitcoin, Ethereum, all transferred into a single anonymous wallet. Value, $80 million. Final target, the insult. Sunlight was beginning to stain the horizon. 6:00 a.m. Her window was closing. It was time for the domestic accounts. She logged into their joint checking account. Balance, $786 or $452. This was their life account. Mortgage, staff, her monthly stipend. She drained it, every last cent. Then she paused. She allowed herself a grim smile. She initiated one final transfer, a deposit into the same joint account. Exactly $100. Then she turned to his personal checking account, emptied it, and left him $1, just enough for a cup of coffee or a bus fare. It was over. She leaned back, her body trembling. Her eyes scanned the final tally. She had just liquidated and transferred over $600 million. "David," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's done. Phase 1 is complete." "Jesus, Caro," David breathed. "I'm looking at the logs. It's a digital guillotine. You didn't just rob him. You erased him." "Phase 2, she said, already in motion. The data. Michael's in-house server, tucked away in the climate-controlled basement, held his entire life. Every email, every contract, and most importantly, the hidden encrypted partition labeled contingency. His blackmail folder. Now it was hers. "I'm initiating the transfer to the secure cloud," David said. "It's 800 gigs. It'll take about 20 minutes. Once it's done, I'll wipe the source drive. I mean, really wipe it. DoD-level sanitation. Not one byte will survive." While the data flowed, Carolyn moved through the house. She didn't take anything of luxury. Not the jewelry, not the art, not the designer clothes. She packed one suitcase. Essentials only. The burner phones, her new passport, the crypto ledger, the things she had owned before Michael, and the tools of the life she would live after. She walked into the bedroom. His pillows still bore the imprint of his head. She felt nothing. She stepped into the master bathroom and retrieved the positive pregnancy test from the drawer, the one that had started it all, the one with its twin pink lines, defiant and undeniable. She placed it gently on his pillow. Her phone buzzed. A message from David. "Download complete. Wiping the drive now. You need to go, Caro. Now. The digital trail is gone. Now erase the physical one." Carolyn descended the grand staircase for the final time. In the foyer, she paused. Her eyes fell on a massive, framed photo of her and Michael on their wedding day. They looked so happy. It was all a lie. She took the single house key from her purse and set it on the marble table beneath the portrait. Then she walked out the front door, leaving it unlocked. At the bottom of the long, winding drive of their other home, the Greenwich estate she'd driven to in a rental car booked under a false name, an untraceable car service was already waiting. The sun was rising. It was the first day of her new life, and the last day of Michael Pierce's. He just didn't know it yet. Michael Pierce awoke to the gentle rumble of descent into St. Bart's and the syrupy voice of a flight attendant offering a warm towel. He felt invincible. The flight had passed in a blissful, dreamless haze. He'd spent the first 2 hours messaging Sienna, teasing her, before slipping into a deep sleep. He was a king in the clouds, flying toward his mistress, with his perfect life and pregnant wife waiting obediently back home. He disembarked, breezing through the private customs lane. Just beyond, Sienna was waiting. She looked radiant in a white linen dress. He kissed her hard, a possessive, public claim. "The wait is over," he replied, guiding her toward the sleek black Mercedes waiting to take them to the villa. The first hint of trouble was subtle. As they sank into the plush leather seats, Michael pulled out his Amex Centurion card to tip the private concierge. "My apologies, Mr. Pierce," the man said politely. "It has been declined." Michael blinked. "Declined? Impossible. Run it again." The man did. Same result. Michael frowned and produced another card. "A J.P. Morgan Reserve." Declined. Sienna watched, a hint of concern on her face. "Everything okay, darling?" "It's nothing," Michael snapped, color rising in his cheeks. He retrieved a thick stack of euros from his wallet and handed them over. "Probably a network issue." But something cold had settled beneath his skin. He sat in silence on the drive, distracted, distant. He kept checking his phone, opening his banking apps. "Invalid credentials. Please contact customer service." He tried to reset a password. The request for a confirmation code was sent to his email. When Michael tried to access his inbox, he was met with another barrier. "Unusual activity has been detected on your account. Access has been temporarily suspended." By the time they arrived at the grand waterfront villa, Michael's mood had soured completely. He stormed into the study, slamming the door. He needed to speak to his private banker at Morgan Stanley, David Chen. "Mr. Pierce," said the familiar voice. "Good morning. I was expecting your call." "David, what the hell is going on?" Michael snapped. "None of my cards are working. I'm locked out of everything." There was a pause. When David Chen spoke again, his voice was tight, formal. "Michael, according to our logs, A full liquidation of your portfolio was initiated at approximately 11 p.m. Eastern Time last night. All assets were converted to cash and wired out. Michael went pale. What? That's impossible. I was on a plane. We have the logs, David replied, his voice clinical. The login was verified. 2-factor authentication codes were entered. All funds were transferred to a corporate holding account. As of 3:45 a.m. this morning, your account balance with us is 0. 0? Michael repeated. The word tasted foreign. The same pattern was detected at Goldman, David said quietly. And I've just received alerts from our correspondent banks in Geneva and the Cayman Islands. Your offshore accounts, they've been emptied. Michael's phone slipped from his lifeless fingers. He collapsed into a leather chair, his mind spinning. This wasn't a hack. A hacker would have left a mess. This was surgical. This wasn't random. It was personal. And then the thought came. So absurd, so massive, it almost made him laugh. Carolyn. No, impossible. Sweet, docile Carolyn. The woman who planned charity events. The woman who couldn't possibly. He grabbed his phone and dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. He called the house line. It rang and rang, unanswered. Panic, an emotion Michael hadn't experienced since adolescence, started to rise in his chest. He called Kenji Tanaka. Kenji! He barked. It's gone. Everything. The money. It's all gone. Damien, Kenji said firmly. Slow down. Tell me what's happening. Michael relayed the story. When he finished, there was a long, heavy silence. It's her, Michael whispered. It has to be her. Your wife? Kenji sounded dubious. Michael, she plans parties, not financial heists. You don't know her, Michael shouted. There was a life before me. She worked in D.C., Oppo research, forensic... something. He stopped, panting. Forensic accounting. No. God. Opposition research. Kenji's breath caught. Jesus Christ, Michael. That's not a side career. That's a weapon. Stay where you are. I'm going to the penthouse. The waiting was agony. Hours later, Kenji called back. His voice was lead. I'm at the penthouse, Michael. The police are here. I told them you suspected a break-in. And? Michael demanded. There's no forced entry, Kenji said quietly. But she's gone. Her clothes are here, her jewelry, everything except one suitcase. The staff hasn't seen her since the night you left. What did you find? In your office, Kenji said. The safe is open, empty. The copy of the prints is on the floor. The crypto ledger is gone. Michael waited, breath held. In the bedroom, Kenji continued, she left something on your pillow. What was it? Michael rasped. A pregnancy test, positive. A sound escaped Michael's throat, somewhere between a gasp and a choke. A message. She wasn't just taking the money. She was taking his child, his heir, and the server, Kenji added, his voice low. The server in the basement. It's been wiped, professionally. Whatever was on there, Michael, it's gone. Or rather, someone else has it now. The blackmail files, the leverage, the power, all of it. Find her, Michael whispered, his voice sharp and venomous. I don't care what it costs. Use everything. I want her found, Kenji. I want my son, and I want her to pay. Find Carolyn Reed. The hunt had begun. But Carolyn Reed no longer existed. A week later, a woman named Anna Miller, visibly pregnant, stepped off a train in Lisbon, Portugal. She wore simple clothes, her once glossy hair cut short and dyed a mousy brown. She checked into a modest, prepaid apartment overlooking the Tagus River. That night, she received an encrypted message from David. They're good, Caro. Kenji's team is sharp. They're tracking the money flow. They found the Liechtenstein account. They're moving to freeze it. Anna Miller, FK Carolyn Reed, felt a small, cold smile touch her lips. She typed her reply. I know. I expected them to. How much was in it when they froze it? David's reply came back instantly. About $5 million. Anna sipped her herbal tea. Good. That was the bait. The rest is already in cold storage and gold bullion, sitting in a vault in Zurich. Let them have the $5 million. It's their finder's fee. She was not just running. She was redeeming. She opened her new laptop and a secure satellite-linked internet connection. She opened the 800 GB contingency file. She didn't send it to the press. That was messy. That was Michael's way. Her way was surgical. She anonymized a single file, proof of Michael's specific insider trading on a recent pharma deal, and sent it to a dedicated SEC whistleblower portal. She took another file, proof of a U.S. senator's affair, funded by a Pierce Capital slush fund, and sent it directly to the senator's wife, a woman Carolyn knew from her D.C. days to be far more ruthless than her husband. Finally, she took the files detailing Michael's plans to leverage his own partners out of the new fund and sent them, anonymously, to the partners themselves. She closed the laptop. The storm had been unleashed. It wasn't about the money. The money was just the tool. It was about justice. It was about ensuring that man could never, ever use his power to threaten her or her child again. He hadn't just lost his wife. He hadn't just lost his son. He had lost the armor that made him invincible. 3 months later, Anna Miller sat on a small balcony in Lisbon, the bright Portuguese sun warming her face. She held her newborn son, Leo. She was reading the international news on her tablet. Michael Pierce indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud. Senator Davis resigns, citing family reasons. Pierce Capital Partners files for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy following internal coup. She looked down at the sleeping infant in her arms. "It's just us now, little one," she whispered. It was never about revenge. It was about resilience. It was about taking back the dignity he had tried to strip from her, one lie at a time. She had been a victim. Then she became a survivor. Now, finally, she was free. This is a story of resilience, of the strength a mother finds, and of the price of betrayal. If Carolyn's story of taking back her power resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and second chances. Robert Kemp had everything a man could dream of. A billion-dollar empire, a penthouse that scraped the New York skyline, and a wife whose beauty was the envy of his circle. But from his sterile glass office, 30 floors above the city, he watched the storm clouds gather, an ominous mirror to the tempest brewing in his own home. He had become a ghost in his marriage, haunted by ambition and a secret that lived on his phone under a different name. He believed he had all the time in the world to fix it, to choose his wife, Rachel, and their unborn child. But that night, as the rain lashed against the windows and he saw her frail figure collapse on the slick pavement below, he realized time had just run out. He thought the tragedy was the storm, the collapse, the betrayal. He was wrong. The real storm was what she did next. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on wealth. It was all clean lines, Italian marble, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan. Robert Kemp stood before one of these windows, not admiring the view, but watching his own reflection superimposed over the sprawling city lights. He saw the sharp cut of his Tom Ford suit, the glint of his Patek Philippe watch, and the weary set of his jaw. He was the king of this kingdom, but the crown felt heavier than it ever had. Behind him, Rachel moved through the cavernous living room like a whisper. She used to fill this space with laughter and the scent of the oil paints she loved. Now, Her presence was almost apologetic. He heard the soft clink of a ceramic mug on the granite countertop. "Robert, I made some chamomile tea," she said, her voice soft, trying to find a crack in the wall of his focus. "Thanks, Lena," he murmured, his eyes still locked on the phone in his hand. The numbers on the screen represented the final push for the Aperture Tech acquisition, a deal that would cement his legacy, a deal worth more than most small countries. It was all he could think about. She drifted closer, her hand resting tentatively on his arm. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, a reaction born of a guilt so profound it had become a part of his physical wiring. He'd been working late for months. Working was the official term. Isabel Moreau, the brilliant and ruthless head of his European division, was the unofficial one. Their relationship was a transaction of ambition and convenience, a sterile affair that took place in 5-star hotels and private jets. A world away from this home he was slowly poisoning. "You seem so far away," Rachel said, her thumb stroking the sleeve of his suit. "Is everything okay with the deal?" "It's the final stretch. High stakes. You know how it is," he said, the excuse tasting like ash in his mouth. He finally turned to her, really looking at her for the first time all evening. Her normally vibrant face was pale, and there were faint, lavender shadows under her kind, brown eyes. She was wearing one of his old, oversized cashmere sweaters, and it only emphasized her fragility. He felt a pang of something, not just guilt, but a deep, aching loss for the man he used to be with her. The man who would have dropped everything to listen. "I have something to tell you," she said, a nervous energy fluttering in her voice. "Something that might help. Ground us again." He forced a smile, pocketing his phone. "I'm all ears." She took a deep breath and led him to the sofa, her hands trembling slightly as she held his. "We've been talking about it for so long, about when the right time would be. With your work being so crazy, I know it's never seemed perfect. But maybe this is what makes it perfect." She was rambling, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. "What now?" She placed his hand on her flat stomach. The cashmere was soft beneath his palm. "Robert," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The words hit him like a physical blow. A baby, a child, a life that would bind him to this home, to this woman, forever. A decade ago, this would have been his ultimate dream. He and Rachel building a family in the city they loved. But now it felt like a complication, another variable in an equation he could no longer control. His mind wasn't on a nursery. It was on hostile takeovers, and Isabel's sharp, strategic mind that mirrored his own. He looked at Rachel's hopeful face, at the pure, unadulterated joy in her eyes, and the lie was already forming on his lips. "Lena, that's amazing news." He pulled her into a hug, the gesture stiff and unnatural. He was holding his wife, the mother of his child, but his mind was across the ocean, in a different city, with a different woman. As he held her, he felt the vibration of his phone in his pocket. A text message. He knew exactly who it was from. And in that moment, holding his pregnant wife, Robert Kemp knew he was a fraud of the highest order. The days that followed Rachel's announcement were a masterclass in deception. Robert played the part of the expectant father with chilling precision. He accompanied her to the first doctor's appointment, watching the grainy, pulsing image on the ultrasound screen with feigned awe. He held her hand, squeezed it at the right moments, and said all the right things. "A heartbeat," he'd whispered, his voice thick with a performance that deserved an award. Our baby's heartbeat. But his heart wasn't in that sterile, hopeful room. It was in encrypted emails and hushed late-night calls. The Aperture Tech deal was entering its most volatile phase. Isabel was his general on the front lines in London, and their communication was constant, a blend of corporate strategy and the clipped, intimate shorthand of their affair. "The board is wavering, Robert. We need a show of force." Isabel's voice would crackle through his high-tech earpiece as he stared out at the city, Rachel sleeping peacefully in their bed, just a room away. "I'll be there Monday," he'd promised, the lie slipping out easily. He'd tell Rachel it was a last-minute emergency board meeting, a fire he had to put out in person. She was always so understanding. Too understanding. Her trust was a knife he twisted in his own gut with every lie he told. Rachel, meanwhile, tried to build a nest in their cold, modern penthouse. She brought home books on parenting, fabric swatches for a nursery, and organic prenatal vitamins that sat accusingly on the kitchen counter. She was trying to build a bridge back to him, brick by hopeful brick, and he was letting her do it, knowing a tidal wave was coming. The storm, both literal and metaphorical, began on a Thursday night. A fierce nor'easter was barreling toward the city, and the sky had been a bruised purple all day. Robert was on a conference call in his home office, the door shut but not quite latched. It was a tense negotiation with Aperture's primary shareholders, and Isabel was on the line from London, her voice sharp and commanding. "They're trying to leverage the media against us, Robert. We need to kill that narrative before it gets legs," Isabel said, her French accent sharpening with urgency. "I'll have my PR team draft a statement immediately," Robert replied, pacing the length of the office. "No, it needs to come from you. A personal touch," she insisted. "You'll be here Monday. We can strategize over dinner Sunday night. Just us." There was an intimacy in her tone that was more than professional. A shared history of battles, won in the boardroom and celebrated in the bedroom. "I miss you," she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Meant only for him. He didn't respond to that part, acutely aware of the paper-thin walls of his life. But it was too late. Rachel had been walking past the office, a plate of sliced apples in her hand, a peace offering for his stressful day. She'd heard Isabel's voice, a voice she recognized from company galas and shareholder reports. But it was the tone that made her freeze, the possessiveness, the familiarity. "I miss you." The three simple words landed like stones, shattering the fragile glass of her denial. She pushed the door open slightly. Robert stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the window where lightning was beginning to fork across the sky. He was completely absorbed, a different man from the one who had smiled at the ultrasound. This was the real Robert, the one she had been losing for months. He ended the call and turned, finally noticing her in the doorway. The plate of apples slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent apartment. "Lena?" he asked, his face a mask of concern, but his eyes, for a split second, flashed with the panic of being caught. "Who is Isabel Moreau to you, Robert?" she asked, her voice quiet and dangerously steady. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, devastating question. "She's my colleague, head of the European division. You know that," he said, taking a step toward her, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Don't," she warned, holding up a hand. The first tear escaped, tracing a path down her pale cheek. "Don't lie to me. I heard her. The way she spoke to you, the air crackled with a tension that rivaled the storm outside. The first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the windows, like accusations being thrown from the heavens. He could see the dawning, horrific realization in her eyes. The later nights, the sudden trips, the emotional distance, all the scattered pieces were clicking into place for her, forming a picture of betrayal so ugly it stole her breath. "Rachel, it's not what you think," he began. The most pathetic and predictable of all clichés. "Isn't it?" she whispered, her gaze dropping to her stomach, her hand instinctively moving to shield the tiny, innocent life within. Or is it exactly what I think? The shattered plate on the floor was a prelude. The real explosion came next. Rachel's quiet devastation erupted into a storm of grief and rage that had been brewing for months. "All this time," she choked out, her voice raw. "All those late nights you were closing a deal. All those trips to put out fires. Was she the fire, Robert? Was our marriage the thing you were trying to escape?" Robert felt the walls of his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Every lie, every evasion was being laid bare under the harsh light of her pain. "Rachel, it's complicated. The business—" "Don't you dare hide behind your business!" she shrieked, the sound foreign and terrifying coming from her. "This isn't about business. This is about us. This is about you looking me in the eye at our first ultrasound and telling me you loved me while you were sleeping with another woman." The rain was a torrential downpour now, hammering against the windows in furious, percussive blasts. The wind howled, a symphony for their marital collapse. "It wasn't like that," he insisted, his voice rising. It was a mistake. A symptom of the pressure I've been under." "A mistake?" she repeated, a hollow, bitter laugh escaping her lips. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is not setting the alarm. This is a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to betray our child before it's even born." Her words were daggers, each one finding its mark. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to somehow absorb her pain, but he knew he was the source of it. He was the poison. His phone buzzed on the desk. A text. Then another. It was Isabel. "The shareholders are calling an emergency virtual meeting. Midnight London time. You need to be on this call, Robert. This is it." Midnight in London was 7 p.m. in New York. Right now. He glanced at his phone, a flicker of instinct, and Rachel saw it. Her eyes, red-rimmed and filled with tears, narrowed with a new, colder fury. "Of course," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a chilling resignation. "Even now. She's more important. The deal is more important." "Lena, that's not true," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was torn. The call was the culmination of 2 years of work, his legacy, his empire. But his wife, his pregnant wife, was falling apart in front of him. "I need some air," she said numbly, turning and walking toward the door, her movements robotic. "Air! Rachel, look outside! There's a hurricane out there!" he yelled, panicked. "Where are you going?" "Away from you," she said, her voice flat. She pulled on a thin raincoat, her hands shaking too much to properly button it. I can't breathe in here anymore. I can't breathe the same air as you." She pulled the heavy door open and stepped out into the hallway. He started to go after her, but his phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It was his COO. "Robert, you need to get on the line now. They're threatening to walk." He was frozen in a moment of impossible choice. His entire professional life on one line, his entire personal life walking out the door. In a moment of catastrophic misjudgment, driven by the adrenaline of the deal, he chose the call. "I'll just stabilize this. Then I'll go after her," he told himself. "She'll just go down to the lobby and cool off." He answered the call, his voice a strained, false calm. "I'm here. Let's handle this." He walked back to the window of his office as he talked, his words about market caps and shareholder value a meaningless drone in his ears. He scanned the street below, searching for her. And then he saw her. Rachel hadn't gone to the lobby. She had walked out onto the street, into the full fury of the storm. The wind whipped her raincoat around her, and the rain plastered her hair to her face. She looked small and lost, a solitary figure in the chaos of the weather. She took a few unsteady steps, then swayed. From 30 floors up, it was like watching a silent movie. He saw her hand go to her stomach. He saw her knees buckle. He saw her collapse onto the wet, glistening pavement, a fallen leaf in a raging river. No, he breathed into the phone. The voices of the shareholders faded into a dull roar. The billion-dollar deal vanished. The only thing in the world was the image of his wife, his pregnant wife, lying motionless in the middle of a storm he had created. He dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the voices still chattering from the speaker. He didn't hear them. He was already running, his heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against his ribs. He had made his choice, and it was the wrong one. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity. Robert jabbed the lobby button repeatedly, his mind a maelstrom of panic and regret. The calm, calculating CEO was gone, replaced by a terrified husband. He burst out of the building's grand entrance, the doorman shouting after him, and ran into the deluge. The rain was cold and stinging, soaking his suit in seconds. He saw her immediately, a small heap on the dark, rain-slicked asphalt. A taxi swerved violently to avoid her. "Rachel!" he screamed, his voice swallowed by the wind. He reached her side, dropping to his knees on the pavement. Her face was terrifyingly pale, her eyes closed. He felt for a pulse in her neck, his fingers clumsy and shaking. It was there, faint, but there. "Somebody help!" he roared at the indifferent city. "Call 911. He gently cradled her head, trying to shield her from the worst of the rain with his own body. "Lena, I'm so sorry," he whispered, the words a useless, pathetic mantra. "Please wake up. Please be okay." The wail of a siren cut through the storm's howl. Paramedics were there within minutes, their movements efficient and urgent. They loaded Rachel onto a stretcher, her face stark white against the red canvas. Robert tried to climb into the ambulance with her, but a paramedic held him back. "Sir, we need room to work. Follow us to Lenox Hill Hospital." The ambulance doors slammed shut, and it sped away, its lights painting streaks of red and white on the wet streets. Robert was left standing alone in the storm, dripping and broken. For the first time, he felt the true weight of his actions. This wasn't a negotiation he could win or a problem he could throw money at. This was a consequence, real and terrifying. At the hospital, the minutes bled into hours. He sat in a sterile, beige waiting room, the smell of antiseptic burning his nostrils. He had called her emergency contact, her best friend Clara, who arrived looking like a storm cloud herself, her eyes shooting daggers of pure hatred at him. "What did you do to her?" Clara demanded, her voice low and venomous. Robert started, but no words came. What could he say? "I broke her heart and she collapsed from the stress. I prioritized a business deal over my pregnant wife." Finally, a doctor appeared. "Mr. Vance?" Robert shot to his feet. "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" "Your wife is stable," the doctor said, his expression grim. "She suffered from a vasovagal syncope episode, a sudden drop in heart rate and blood pressure, likely brought on by extreme emotional distress. It caused her to faint. We're keeping her overnight for observation. The baby's heartbeat is stable for now, but this was a significant shock to her system. She needs to avoid all forms of stress." The doctor's gaze was pointed, leaving no doubt who he considered the primary source of that stress. The relief that washed over Robert was so immense, his legs nearly gave out. But it was short-lived, replaced by a new wave of dread. Rachel was awake. She was asking to see Clara, not him. He waited another hour before Clara emerged, her face softened slightly with pity. "She'll see you now. Be gentle, Robert. For God's sake, just be gentle." He walked into the private room on trembling legs. Rachel was sitting up in bed, looking impossibly small against the white pillows. An IV was taped to her hand. She looked exhausted, fragile, but as he met her gaze, he saw something new in her eyes. The hurt was still there, but it was overshadowed by a calm, unbreakable resolve. The fire of her anger had burned out, leaving behind something harder, like tempered steel. "Lena, he started, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry. I can't tell you how sorry I am." She held up a hand, stopping him. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, devoid of the emotion from before. It was that very lack of emotion that terrified him. "I've had a lot of time to think, lying here," she said, her eyes fixed on a point on the wall just past his shoulder. "About us. About this baby." "We can fix this," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "I'll cancel the trip. I'll sell the company. I don't care. I'll do anything." "No, you won't," she said simply. "Because this isn't about one deal or one trip, Robert. It's about who you are. Your ambition is a hunger that will never be full. I thought I could be enough. I thought this baby would be enough. But we'll always just be an inconvenient distraction from your real love." "That's not true." She finally looked at him, and the coldness in her eyes chilled him to the bone. This was her stunning move. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a demand, it was a declaration. "It's over, Robert," she said. The words were delivered without malice, as a simple statement of fact. "I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to scream anymore. I'm just done. I'm filing for divorce." He stared at her, speechless. He had expected tears, ultimatums, a chance to bargain. He had not expected this quiet, final severance. "I will not raise my child in a house filled with lies and ghosts," she continued, her hand resting on her stomach. "This baby deserves a mother who isn't waiting by the window for a husband who will never truly come home. So you can have your empire. You can have your deal. You can have Isabel. I am taking my child, and I am building a life, a real one, somewhere else." She had taken the biggest crisis of their lives, the moment of her greatest vulnerability, and found in it a strength he had never seen. She wasn't a victim collapsing in the storm. She was a survivor walking out of the wreckage, and she was leaving him behind. Robert returned to the penthouse the next morning. The storm had passed, leaving behind a city scrubbed clean and glistening under a pale, watery sun. But inside his home, the storm raged on. The silence was the first thing that hit him. It was a physical presence, vast and suffocating. The air was still, heavy with the echoes of last night's fight. The shattered apple plate had been cleaned up by the overnight staff, but the ghost of it remained. Rachel was gone. He walked through the rooms, a trespasser in his own life. Half the clothes in her closet were missing. Her favorite books were gone from the nightstand. The small wooden easel she kept in the corner of the living room, which she hadn't used in years but refused to part with, was gone. The only thing she'd left behind was a single, framed photo on his bedside table, a picture of them from their honeymoon in Italy, young and ridiculously happy, their faces lit by the Tuscan sun. It was a cruel reminder of the man he'd once been. His phone, which he'd retrieved from his office, buzzed with notifications, emails of congratulations, texts from his board. The Aperture Tech deal had closed in the early hours of the morning. His gambit had paid off. He was now, by all metrics, more powerful and successful than ever. The deal of a lifetime was done. He stared at the email from his COO, the subject line in all caps. "We did it!" He felt nothing, The triumphant thrill he had chased for 2 years was completely absent. The victory was hollow, a feast of ashes. He had won the world and lost his soul. The days turned into a week, then 2. Robert moved through his life like an automaton. He went to meetings, made decisions, and managed his empire with the same ruthless efficiency as always. But it was a performance. Inside, he was spiraling. He'd try to call Rachel, but the calls went straight to voicemail. His texts, increasingly desperate pleas for a conversation, remained unanswered, a string of stark blue bubbles with no reply. She had blocked him completely. He sent flowers to Clara's apartment, where he assumed Rachel was staying. They were returned the next day with a curt note. "She doesn't want them." He had his lawyer reach out to her, and the response came back through her own attorney, a woman with a reputation for being a shark. The message was cold and clear. All communication would be through legal channels. The divorce papers were being drawn up. The penthouse became his prison. Every object mocked him. He saw Rachel in the curve of the sofa where she used to read, in the kitchen where she'd tried to teach him how to cook, in the empty space beside him, in their sprawling bed. He stopped sleeping, haunted by the image of her collapsing in the rain. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, his heart hammering, the sound of the ambulance siren echoing in the silent room. One night, drowning in whiskey and self-loathing, he found a box in the back of a storage closet. It was filled with Rachel's old sketchbooks. He sat on the floor and flipped through them. There were charcoal sketches of the city, watercolors of flowers, and countless portraits of him. Early in their relationship, she had drawn him constantly. Robert laughing, Robert sleeping, Robert staring thoughtfully into the distance. She had seen him, really seen him, with an artist's eye and a lover's heart. The last drawing in the final book was from a year ago. It was a sketch of his back as he sat at his desk, his face illuminated only by the glow of his laptop. The drawing was stark, lonely, and unfinished. She had stopped seeing his face and only saw his back. She had seen him turning away long before he had. The realization was a gut punch. This wasn't a sudden implosion. It was a slow, creeping decay he had been too blind and too arrogant to notice. His ambition hadn't just been a distraction. It had been an eraser, slowly wiping away the color and life from their marriage until only a faint, sad outline was left. He finally called Isabel. She answered, her voice bright and victorious. "Robert, I was wondering when you'd call to celebrate. I've booked our usual spot at Le Bernardin for tonight." He stood up, the sketchbook still in his hand, and walked to the window overlooking the city he had conquered. "It's over, Isabel," he said, his voice flat and dead. There was a pause. "The deal is done, Robert. What's over?" "Us," he clarified. "This, whatever it was. It's over." It was a mistake. He could hear her sharp intake of breath, the surprise and indignation, but he didn't care. He ended the call before she could reply, tossing the phone onto the sofa. Ending it with Isabel wasn't a solution. It was just one small, pathetic step on a long, dark road of atonement. He had to fix himself before he could even begin to ask for a chance to be a father to his child. The silence of the penthouse pressed in, and for the first time, Robert Kemp began to listen. While Robert was rattling around in his gilded cage, Rachel was starting over in a small, second-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn that belonged to her friend, Clara. The place was cluttered with books, half-finished canvases, and the comforting scent of coffee and turpentine. It was a world away from the sterile perfection of the penthouse, and for the first time in a long time, Rachel could breathe. The first week was a blur of exhaustion and grief. She slept, cried, and ate the simple, nourishing meals Clara put in front of her. She felt hollowed out, a fragile shell of the woman she used to be. The trauma of the collapse and the subsequent hospital stay had left her physically weak, and the doctor's warning to avoid stress felt like a cruel joke. Her entire life was stress, but as her physical strength slowly returned, something else began to stir within her. A flicker of the old Rachel, the artist, the woman who existed before she became Mrs. Robert Kemp. One afternoon, Clara came home from her job as a gallery curator to find Rachel staring at a blank canvas that had been leaning against the wall. "I haven't painted in 3 years," Rachel said softly, her hand hovering over the pristine white surface. "Robert, he said the fumes weren't good for the penthouse's air filtration system." Clara snorted. "Robert wouldn't know a real thing if it hit him in his custom-tailored suit. The only thing he filters is his conscience." She put a comforting hand on Rachel's shoulder. "Maybe it's time to make a mess." That evening, Rachel picked up a piece of charcoal. Her hand felt clumsy at first, the muscle memory buried under years of disuse. But then, she began to draw. She didn't think. She just let the emotions flow out of her fingertips and onto the canvas. She drew the storm, not the literal one, but the emotional tempest that had been her life. Dark, swirling lines, flashes of jagged white, and at the center, a small, protected space, a calm eye in the hurricane. It was raw, chaotic, and deeply honest. For the next few months, painting became her therapy and her salvation. She poured all her pain, her anger, and her burgeoning hope into her work. The canvases piled up in the small apartment, abstract explorations of betrayal, portraits of strength emerging from sorrow, and vibrant, hopeful landscapes that represented the future she was determined to build for her child. She was no longer just the millionaire's discarded wife. She was an artist, reclaiming her voice, brushstroke by brushstroke. Her belly grew, a constant, gentle reminder of the new life she was protecting. She talked to the baby constantly, promising it a world filled with color, love, and honesty. This child would not be raised in the shadow of a glass tower, defined by its father's wealth. This child would be raised in the light. Her lawyer, a formidable woman named Margaret, handled the divorce proceedings with brutal efficiency. Robert's first offer was, predictably, a monetary one. A settlement so large it was obscene, a trust fund for the baby that would ensure it never wanted for anything. Rachel's response, delivered through Margaret, was swift and unequivocal. "I don't want his money. I want his accountability." She wasn't going to be bought off. She would accept child support, as was the baby's right, but she refused any personal alimony. She would make her own way. Her demands were not financial. They were personal. She wanted a clear, legally binding co-parenting plan. She wanted Robert to attend parenting classes. She wanted him to undergo therapy to deal with his work addiction and narcissism. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was trying to ensure that their child would have a father who was present, not just a benefactor who was absent. Margaret was stunned. "In 20 years of divorce law, I've never had a client turn down a settlement like that," she told Rachel over the phone. "You're either crazy or the strongest woman I've ever met." "I'm a mother," Rachel replied simply. "My child's well-being is not for sale." Her strength wasn't loud or aggressive. It was a quiet, deep-rooted power that had grown in the ruins of her old life. She was building a new foundation, not with marble and steel, but with paint, courage, and a fierce, protective love for the baby growing inside her. She was terrified, yes, but for the first time in years, she felt truly, authentically alive. She was no longer a reflection of Robert's success. She was the creator of her own. The meeting took place in a neutral, sterile conference room at a mediation firm in Midtown. It was the first time Robert and Rachel had been in the same room in 4 months. The air was thick with unspoken words and the formal presence of their lawyers. Robert saw her the moment she walked in. Pregnancy suited her. It had softened the sharp edges of her grief, replacing them with a quiet, powerful glow. She carried herself with a newfound confidence that was both beautiful and intimidating. She met his gaze for a brief second, her expression unreadable, before turning her attention to her lawyer, Margaret. The dismissal was more painful than any angry tirade. Robert had spent the last 4 months in his own personal hell. He had done what she'd asked. He'd found a therapist, a no-nonsense psychiatrist who specialized in high-powered executives with personality disorders. The sessions were brutal, forcing Robert to confront the empty, validation-seeking void that drove him. He had also enrolled in a parenting class in a community center downtown, sitting awkwardly in a circle of plastic chairs with a dozen other expectant couples, learning how to swaddle a doll and change a diaper. He was the only one there alone. He was changing, but he knew it was just a start. He wasn't doing it to win her back. He knew that bridge had been burned. He was doing it for the child. He was doing it so he could one day look his son or daughter in the eye and not see a reflection of his own failures. "Mr. Vance," Margaret began, her voice crisp and businesslike, "my client has reviewed your initial proposal. While she appreciates the financial provisions for the child, she finds them insufficient in other areas." Robert's lawyer, a slick corporate litigator named Arthur, shifted in his seat. "Insufficient? The trust is ironclad. The child will be set for life." Rachel spoke for the first time, her voice calm and steady. "My child already is set for life, Arthur. It will have a mother who loves it unconditionally. What is in question is whether it will have a father." The words hung in the air. Robert felt his cheeks burn with shame. "Rachel is proposing a detailed co-parenting agreement," Margaret continued, sliding a thick document across the polished table. "It outlines visitation schedules, holiday arrangements, and decisions regarding education and healthcare. It also includes several stipulations." Arthur picked up the document and began to read, his eyebrows rising higher with every page. "Mandatory therapy sessions for Mr. Vance to continue for a minimum of 2 years. Completion of 3 separate parenting courses. A probationary period of supervised visitation for the first 6 months. This is unorthodox." "This is non-negotiable," Rachel said firmly. Robert didn't even look at the document. He looked at Rachel. "I'll do it," he said, his voice quiet but clear. Arthur turned to him, astonished. "Robert, let's discuss this. Some of these clauses could be seen as punitive." "They're not punitive, Arthur. They're prudent," Robert said, never taking his eyes off Rachel. "She's right. I haven't earned the right to be called a father yet. I need to show that I can be one." He turned his full attention to his estranged wife. "I'll sign it. I'll do all of it, Rachel, and more. Whatever it takes." For the first time, a flicker of surprise registered in her eyes. She had expected a fight, a negotiation, another example of him trying to leverage his power. She had not expected this quiet, immediate capitulation. "The agreement also states," Margaret added, pressing on, "that you are not to have overnight contact with Isabel Morrow or any other romantic partner during your parenting time for the first 5 years. This was the final test, a direct shot at the source of the betrayal. Isabel and I are no longer associated, personally or professionally," Robert stated, his voice even. "She resigned from the company 2 months ago. That clause will not be an issue." The room fell silent. Rachel stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time since that horrible night. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, but also a glimmer of something she hadn't seen in years. Sincerity. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to manipulate the situation. He was simply agreeing. Very well, Margaret said, closing her folder. We'll have the final documents drawn up for your signature. As they all stood to leave, Robert spoke again. Rachel, wait. She paused at the door, her back to him. The nursery, he said, his voice catching slightly. I had it finished, the way you wanted, with the mural of the stars on the ceiling you showed me a picture of. If you ever need anything from the apartment, or if you just want to see it, it's there. For the baby. She didn't turn around, but she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. Then she walked out, leaving him standing in the middle of the room, having just signed away his power and taken the first, terrifying step toward earning back his humanity. 5 months later, in the dead of a cold January night, Robert's phone rang. He had been dozing in a chair in his silent, cavernous living room, a book about infant sleep patterns lying open on his chest. He grabbed the phone, his heart instantly hammering. The caller ID read, Clara. Robert, it's time. Clara's voice was tense but steady. Her water broke an hour ago. We're at Lenox Hill. I'm on my way, he said, already on his feet, pulling on the shoes he'd left by the door for this exact moment. He had a bag packed in his car, not for him, but for Rachel, filled with the snacks, comfortable socks and coconut water her birth plan had specified. He had memorized the entire document. This was the moment his therapy and parenting classes had been leading up to. His therapist's voice echoed in his head. Your role is not to demand, but to support. You are not the protagonist of this story, Robert. You are a supporting actor. Show up, be quiet, and do whatever she asks of you. He broke every speed limit getting to the hospital, his mind a silent prayer. Let her be okay. Let the baby be okay. He found Clara in the waiting room of the maternity ward, pacing a hole in the linoleum floor. How is she? He asked, breathless. She's a warrior, Clara said, her eyes red-rimmed. The contractions are getting intense. She's in the room at the end of the hall, room 612. Did she ask for me? Robert asked, his hope fragile. Clara gave him a look that was a mixture of pity and exasperation. No, Robert. She's a little busy right now, but she didn't say you couldn't be here. That's your olive branch. Don't mess it up. He nodded, understanding. He walked to the end of the hall and stood outside room 612. Through the small window in the door, he could see Rachel. Her face was contorted in pain, her hands gripping the bed rails. A nurse was coaching her through a contraction. His first instinct was to burst in, to hold her hand, to tell her she could do it, but he stopped himself. That was what the old Robert would have done. Made the moment about him, about his need to be the hero. The new Robert understood. This was her space, her battle. He was here to offer support, not to invade. So he waited. He sat on the hard plastic chair outside her door and waited. For hours. He listened to her pained cries and the calm, encouraging murmurs of the nurses and Clara. He fielded calls from his office, telling his assistant to cancel his entire week. It's a family emergency, he said, and for the first time the words felt true. His family was in that room, and his empire could burn to the ground for all he cared. A nurse on her break saw him sitting there, his expensive suit rumpled, his face etched with worry. You the father? She asked kindly. I'm trying to be, he answered honestly. She's strong, the nurse said with a smile. You've got a fighter in there. After what felt like a lifetime, a new sound cut through the air. Not a cry of pain, but a cry of life. The thin, mighty wail of a newborn baby. Tears streamed down Robert's face. He buried his head in his hands, overcome with a wave of emotion so powerful it buckled him. Relief, joy, and a profound, bottomless love for a person he hadn't even met yet. He stayed where he was, giving them their time. 10 minutes later, the door opened. It was Clara, her face beaming and tear-streaked. "It's a girl, Robert," she whispered. "She's perfect. Rachel's asking for you." He stood up, his legs shaking, and walked into the room. The scent of new life was in the air. Rachel was propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, looking more beautiful and exhausted than he had ever seen her. And in her arms, wrapped in a pink and white striped blanket, was a tiny, perfect baby with a tuft of dark hair. He approached the bed slowly, reverently. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man, humbled and broken and remade, standing in the presence of a miracle he had almost thrown away. The hospital room felt like a sacred space. The chaotic energy of labor had been replaced by a deep, peaceful quiet, punctuated only by the soft, snuffly sounds of the baby. Robert stood by the bed, his hands clasped behind his back, feeling like an intruder on a holy scene. Rachel looked up at him, her eyes weary but clear. The anger and resentment that had been a wall between them for so long seemed to have dissolved, washed away by the tidal wave of childbirth. In its place was a shared vulnerability. "She's beautiful, Lena," he whispered, his voice thick. "She looks like you," Rachel said softly, a faint smile touching her lips as she looked down at the baby's face. Poor thing. It was a joke, a tiny sliver of their old rapport, and it felt like a gift, a small measure of grace. Do you want to hold her?" Rachel asked, her voice gentle. Robert's breath caught in his throat. He just nodded, unable to speak. He washed his hands at the sink, the motions slow and deliberate, then sat on the edge of the chair beside her bed. Rachel carefully, expertly, transferred the warm, precious bundle into his arms. The baby was so light, so impossibly small. She squirmed and made a little noise, her tiny, wrinkled face bunching up. Her eyes were closed, her eyelashes fine as silk. Robert stared at her, completely mesmerized. This was his daughter, a real, living, breathing piece of his heart, now existing outside of his body. He felt the weight of his failures, the selfishness of his ambition, the cruelty of his betrayal, all crashing down on him. But as he looked at this perfect, innocent life, he also felt a powerful, cleansing wave of purpose. This was his chance to atone, not with words or money, but with a lifetime of devotion. Have you thought of a name?" he asked, his gaze never leaving his daughter's face. "I was thinking, Lily," Rachel said, "for new beginnings, for purity." "Lily," Robert repeated. "Lily Vance. It's perfect." He looked up at Rachel, his eyes swimming with tears. "Thank you, Rachel, for this gift. For not shutting me out completely." "She deserves a father," Rachel said, her voice tired but firm. "Whether you deserve to be one is up to you to prove from this moment on." There was no magical forgiveness in her words, no promise of a reconciled future. It was a statement of fact, a challenge, and it was a challenge he was ready to spend the rest of his life meeting. He spent the next hour just holding Lily, studying every detail of her face, letting her tiny fingers curl around his thumb. He and Rachel didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They were no longer husband and wife, but they were now linked in the most profound way possible. They were parents, co-creators of this new life. When a nurse came in to check on Rachel, Robert carefully handed Lily back to her mother. As he stood up to leave, to give them space, he paused. "I meant what I said, Lena," he said quietly, "about doing whatever it takes. I know I broke our life, but I will not fail this one. I will not fail her." Rachel simply nodded, her eyes on the beautiful baby in her arms. He walked out of the hospital into the crisp, pre-dawn air. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, painting the city in shades of soft pink and grey. The world felt new. The old Robert Kemp had died in that silent, lonely penthouse. The man who walked out of the hospital was someone different. He was Lily's father, and that was a title he was determined to earn. 2 years passed. Life did not snap back into a fairy tale. There was no grand romantic reunion. Instead, something quieter, more realistic, and ultimately more profound took root. A partnership. Robert kept his word. He was a constant, steady presence in Lily's life. He finished his parenting courses. He never missed a therapy session. He adhered to every clause of their co-parenting agreement with a devotion that surprised even his own lawyer. He learned to be a father not in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday moments. He mastered the art of the diaper change, learned to distinguish the hungry cry from the tired cry, and could recite every word to Lily's favourite bedtime story, Good Night Moon. He downsized his life, selling the cold, cavernous penthouse and moving into a more modest, though still luxurious, brownstone in the West Village. It had a small backyard, which he filled with a swing set and a sandbox. He restructured his company, delegating more, travelling less, and making it a non-negotiable rule that he was unreachable between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. every night, Lily's bath time and bedtime. Rachel, free from the constraints of her old life, flourished. She had moved into her own apartment in Brooklyn, a sunny space with a large studio room. Her art, born from pain, had evolved. It became bolder, more vibrant. Her collection, which she titled The Storm and the Calm, was featured in Clara's gallery. It was a critical and commercial success. She was no longer Rachel Vance, the millionaire's wife. She was Rachel Hayes, an artist whose work spoke of resilience and rebirth. They co-parented with a quiet respect and efficiency that sometimes felt more like a business arrangement. But it was one built on a foundation of trust that Robert was painstakingly rebuilding. Their handoffs in a park halfway between their homes were polite, focused on Lily's schedule, her latest word, or a funny face she had learned to make. One bright, crisp Saturday afternoon in autumn, they met at that park. Lily, now a bubbly toddler with her father's intense eyes and her mother's warm smile, was taking her first truly confident steps. She toddled on unsteady legs across the grass, a look of fierce concentration on her face. Robert and Rachel sat on a bench, a comfortable distance between them, watching her. "Her daycare teacher says she's the most determined child in the class," Rachel said, a proud smile on her face. "When she wants something, she doesn't give up." "She gets that from her mother," Robert said, his gaze soft as he watched his daughter. He meant it. He had once mistaken Rachel's kindness for weakness. He now knew it was the bedrock of a strength he could only dream of possessing. Rachel looked at him, a genuine, unguarded warmth in her eyes. "She gets it from both of us." It was a small acknowledgement, but it felt monumental. A recognition that they were a team, that Lily was a perfect fusion of their best parts. Lily, having successfully navigated a treacherous patch of grass, stopped and looked back. She saw both her parents watching her. She grinned, a wide, toothy grin, and then, for the first time, she walked a straight line, right from the spot where she stood, across the space that separated them. She walked away from her mother and straight into the waiting, open arms of her father. Robert lifted her up, burying his face in her soft curls, his heart swelling with a love so pure and powerful it almost hurt. He looked over at Rachel, who was watching them, her face illuminated by the afternoon sun. Their old love story was over. The book closed forever. But as they sat there, two separate people bound by a shared love for their child, it felt like they were just beginning to write a new one. It wasn't a story of romance, but one of redemption, respect, and the quiet, enduring grace of a second chance. The canvas of their future was different than they had ever imagined, but it was, in its own way, beautiful. Robert and Rachel's journey shows us that sometimes the greatest tragedies can lead to the most profound transformations. Their story is a powerful reminder that it's never too late to change, and that true strength isn't about never falling, but about how we choose to get back up and rebuild. What did you think of Rachel's decision to leave and build her own life? Could you forgive Robert? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart.